Hello, hello, everyone. How is it going? Welcome back. This is the first episode of the Linear Tigression Show in the new year.
Woo!
Yeah, starting the year off strong. Woo! Definitely just a reminder to drop your thoughts and or questions and or I don't know, random comments, whatever, in the chat. We are chatty folk and would love to talk to everyone. So and it makes it more fun, like we want you to be a part of it with us. Join us on our journey. I don't know. How is everyone's holiday season / New Year? That's exciting. Anything extra fun or I don't know. Did you do anything fun, David?
We had some people outside for New Year's, which was surprisingly warm here, so that made that a little nicer. So that was great.
That's
really
awesome.
Good to see some friends. So
yeah, especially gosh, I feel like with this state of the, everything that's gone on with COVID and it's so nice to at least kind of be able to see people in person.
Yeah.
Like having friends outside. That's really cool. That's awesome.
Totally.
Yeah.
How about you?
Miss hanging. I really didn't do much. My sister, who lives in Alaska, which actually two things, I guess. Usually, if you may have noticed, I wear an Alaska beanie. And that was from her, actually. And today I'm repping the new Timescale beanies that we have in our shop, which I was really excited about because number one, I love beanies. And this color is just boom in your face, which is really fun.
Well, I was just trying to fix mine and absolutely failing because the image isn't mirrored, and so I'm trying to get the sides of it level, and I can't. Apparently, I just can't do it. It's impossible for me or something. I'm because I'm seeing that it's not straight across, and I'm looking and I'm trying to do it, and I can't get my brain to do it.
The struggle is so real, though.
So anyway,
it's really tough. A few times I was trying to adjust so that time scales in the middle, and it ends up all the way over here. So I feel you. I feel your pain.
There's probably a way to switch that in settings too, but I don't know.
I'm sure. I don't know, or maybe it's always weird to see your mirrored face.
There it is.
It's oh, there you go. Now you can fix your beanie. Wow.
But whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
This is some very important information that we're talking about right now. But yeah, sorry, weird random tangents, but my sister is here from Alaska and we did a lot of just hanging out, which was really fun, and playing board games, which we're super into board games in my family. So also, if people ever want to talk board games, hit me up because I could talk about board games all day. I guess since no one else is jumping into the conversation here, I see there are 3 people watching. I see you. No, just kidding. No pressure ever. There's no pressure ever. But I guess let's jump in. Let's get started with today's fun topic. Whoop, whoop. So today we are going to talk about TimeBucket, TimeBucket NG, which is short for Next Generation. So all my Star Trek fans, I geeked out about that one because I was as soon as they showed it to the company, I was does that stand for Next Gen? Because I'm a weirdo, and it does. So fun fact. And then TimeBucket gap fill, which I'm particularly excited to talk about because I think that's probably the less common function, and one that I think is really useful that probably a lot of people would super enjoy to use.
Absolutely.
So the agenda is as expected, the 3 functions. I really didn't need this agenda slide, but just throwing it in there just in case, just for Jill whenever she edits this. So first off, we're going to talk about time bucket. So this is probably the most common function that, like for those of you who use Timescale regularly, I'm guessing you already know about time bucket. So I don't want to get too much into things that you probably already know about. But for people that are new to time bucket, essentially, also I have allergies, so I might sneeze and I'm sniffly. At least testing wise, it's confirmed it's not COVID, so that's good. But allergies, they stink, man. Sorry, again, weird tangents, just rolling with the new year here. So with time bucket, so this image, I think that this is a nice way of understanding how kind of time bucket works kind of generally. So essentially, right, time bucket helps you take maybe pretty granular data. So in this image, we see that it's hourly data. So it's incrementing every hour. And then it shows, right, 2 kind of days worth. So we have up to the 23-hour mark or 11 p.m. On the first day of the, January in 2016. And then it bumps over to at 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. to the second day in January. Okay. So this is hourly data. So where time bucket is really useful is, say that you want to take that hourly data and kind of map it or re-bucket it into daily data, or maybe like 5-hour data or something. So kind of like mapping all this hourly data into kind of like, in our case here, right, this is we're doing 1 day. So I want all the hours contained in 1 day kind of being mapped to that, like my specified interval of 1 day. So how time bucket works is that you have the input of the desired interval, which in this example is daily. I want to kind of map all of the hourly data to 1 day, specific day chunk, like time interval chunk. Probably shouldn't use chunk because that's a word that we use for other things at Timescale. I truly mean that in the word sense, not the Timescale chunk, like, like a chunk of cake.
Yeah, I mean, I think that here bucket is actually like,
yes.
Bucket essentially, we're bucketing it, right? Like when we say we're bucketing it, it actually sort of means we're saying, okay, everything that in this group or bucket sort of goes in here.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and then this is just specifying. So if our column of values was named time, this is just specifying that we're bucketing our time data from the time column, which I guess I probably could have named it something else, but you get the gist. But anyways, so right, all of the hours that are in the first day are going to be bucketed to write this 1 day. And kind of a note, right, we're starting at 0, all zeros here, or 12 a.m. because we kind of default to the lowest bound of your bucket. We're showing kind of like the first point where the bucket begins. So in this case, right, the bucket begins at the 12 a.m. time. So that's kind of like why, yeah.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so all of our buckets, if you think about the time bucket as a range, so that it's going to go from like the bottom of the range to the top. The bottom of the range is inclusive, and the top of the range is exclusive, meaning if it goes essentially from 2016-01-01 to 2016-01-02, you could think about it as having the range inclusive on the bottom, 2016-01-01, exclusive at the top, 2016-01-02. So it's everything in 2016-01-01, from 0000000, and because timestamps can go out to microseconds, right? It'd be all zeros in the microseconds, and then everything up to all zeros in the microseconds on 2016-01-02 would be included, but that one is not included in it. So yeah, you could go up to 9999999 or whatever, on that.
Yeah. So this is just a nice visual, I think. But what's hopefully, even if you've used TimeBucket before, what you may have not used before is the additional arguments that you have with TimeBucket. So, right, that previous picture was showing the bucket width argument, the time column argument, and then there's two optional arguments that you can use in addition, though not together, which I learned at least in testing. So David, maybe you can expand later on why that decision was made. I mean, you'll probably see that you probably wouldn't have a use to use both of them at the same time, but it's just anyways. So the additional options that I wanted to talk about with you all today is also the offset and origin options, kind of what they are and why you might want to use them. So let's go ahead and jump over. Oh yeah, David,
So
you have something that you want to talk
about?
about?
Maybe I can just add in a couple things. Maybe if you want to go back to the last slide just for a second.
Yes.
One of the main things, so like stop me by the way if you have any of this, like the difference between TimeBucket and DateTrunk or something like that. I don't know if you're going to talk about that.
Oh yeah, no, you should definitely talk about that because that's fun history.
So
history.
Yeah, so part of the reason that we developed TimeBucket originally is that there were things like DateTrunk and other sorts of functions like that. But DateTrunk, for instance, only works at day or hour or minute or I think those are actually, I don't know that you can even do minute boundaries, but I think you can do hour. I know that you can do like basically it's round boundaries. So if I want to do 15 minutes, I can't do that with DateTrunk, but I can do that with TimeBucket. So that's one of the main reasons that we developed TimeBucket, was for those sort of interesting, and for instance, some people may want to do something like graph a downsampled set of time series data at 15-minute intervals, or maybe even at modified intervals, depending on where you're zooming in the graph, right? So you might want to downsample it, like, so there you're not going to necessarily be at a nice even round something that you can DateTrunk to, but instead you might want something that's much more variable, and that's really what TimeBucket was originally developed for. As we start moving into like the TimeBucket NG, which I think Miranda's going to start talking about, that's where it starts getting to look a little bit more like some of the functionality of what DateTrunk allows you to do, and other sorts of things. So we're trying to sort of work them together so that we have the best of both worlds, I think, as part of what's going on there.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, David. So now I'm actually going to hop over to my code here. So the data that I'm going to be using for most of the examples, except for once we get to gap fill, I have a different data set that I'm going to use just because, it's smaller and easier to see things. So this data set, really the only columns that we're going to be looking at is the usage and time column. So if you look here, right, this is my usage column. It's like energy usage. So maybe like kilowatt hours or, per 15-minute intervals. So we have our time is being incremented by 15 minutes. So if I were to use TimeBucket without grouping the data by the bucket, it just kind of like, this is one way that I wanted to do it this, kind of show you the queries this way, just to show you how the original time is being bucketed into the bucket. So like in this case, right, I want to bucket my 15-minute information into hourly kind of bucket times. So here, right, from the 12 a.m. hour to the 1 a.m. hour, kind of right, or the row right before the 1 a.m. hour, this is all going to be bucketed into my 12 a.m. hour bucket, okay? And then as soon as I hit, an entry that's just like David said, like inclusively at the 1 a.m. hour, right? That ticks over into a new bucket. So we see that this, these 4 rows are being kind of mapped into a different bucket than the first 4. So then, right, if I wanted to show like, actually, no, I think I have it right here. So then, right, that's useful because then we can aggregate. I could do an aggregate on my usage here and kind of like figure out how much usage total is occurring within my 1 hour bucket period. So, right, then I add my group by. I'm going to remove that time column and the usage column and just put in the sum or the aggregate of the sum aggregate of the usage, my time bucket column. So I just kind of cut out the time and add these together. And then I group by the bucket, and then I just put in order by, right? We see, and just so I can go back and forth. So we see, right, that the 12 a.m. bucket is being aggregated. We have now 0.04 is the sum of the energy usage of these 4 columns, which we know, right, from this view that that's true, right? There's this being added together, we get 0.04. Cool beans. That's, basics of time bucket, how usually you will use it on an aggregate like this. Again, I'm just going to show it in this way with kind of like usage and time columns just to show how things are being mapped in the buckets. So I just wanted to give that little caveat while I talk so that, you kind of.
So maybe I can do a little pop quiz for people in the chat if anyone wants to.
Ooh, pop quiz. Ooh.
So here's my question. Maybe I'll even type it into the chat. So is time bucket a function or an aggregate? So if anyone wants to put an answer in the chat, thoughts? I think that question, Ryan, is above my pay grade. But if you want to offer people a TimescaleDB hat if they answer, I think that you have the power to do that. Okay, we got one answer from Ryan.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Ryan is my boss and the head of developer advocacy. So, I don't know if his answer counts. Oh, nice. Yes, John Sweeney, function because aggregate seems too obvious. Ooh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it is a function, and so and this is something that people get confused by because it's often used in an aggregate context, and it is used to bucket times, right? But you'll notice that there is a mapping for every row to its bucket. So I can always go, like I can say just from the time and the other argument to the function, which is what is my bucket? What is the bucket that I get out? Or like what is my bucket width? Right? So I have time and bucket width, that will always give me the bucket that it's in. Whereas an aggregate, right, it would be using the previous values. You also can't group by an aggregate. So time bucket is almost always used as a group by in the aggregate clause, which means it has to be a function, because you can't group by an aggregate, because then it would sort of be weird and self-referential. Like there would be some sort of odd feedback that would be going on there. You could do a I guess you could do something that's sort of recursive, or you could do it in a subselect, and then maybe you could group by the output of an aggregate. But inside the aggregate clause, you need to group by either a column or a function on a column, and that's a function that's like a one-to-one map. So time bucket has to be a function; it can't be an aggregate, just so that we're able to group by it. And you can also see why that would be, because we have the 2 inputs. We always produce 1 output per row. We then group by that thing, so you still reduce along that sort of vector, And that's what the group by does, is it reduces by the things that are the same. So because the output of the function is the same for multiple rows, when we group by it, it almost seems like we have aggregated, but we're aggregating along that dimension. It's not actually an aggregate itself. So hopefully that's useful from a sort of fundamental standpoint.
No, that was awesome. I like the idea. Let's quiz more. Let's ask more questions during the stream. That's exciting. We got some answers. This is
And
great.
thanks for answering, John. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so now this is kind of getting into, right, we covered the main arguments of time bucket, but what about offset? So some of you may be familiar with offset, but I imagine that not many have used it. I don't know, maybe that's a wrong assumption. But so what offset allows you to do is shift your bucket kind of bounds by some amount of time, kind of, and this can be whatever time you want it to be. So with offset, you could decide, instead of my bucket kind of starting at where the hour kind of just ticks over, maybe I want it to start 15 minutes before the hour ticks over and go to, the 45-minute mark of the next hour. So I can kind of shift, like basically take my hourly bucket and shift it by X amount of minutes, or maybe like, who knows, like you can, I believe it takes all the same arguments that the bucketing interval would take. And so, for example, right, say that I want to shift my bucket from doing the top of the hour to now occurring 15 minutes before. So now what we see is that these first three columns, or these first three rows, my apologies, they are going to be grouped into one bucket. But then the 45, that 12:45 a.m., as soon as it hits that, because now we've shifted our bucket from the top of the hour to 15 minutes before, the 45 mark now in the time hour is where our next bucket begins. And so now we see that these four rows are actually being, they're the ones that are going to be grouped together in one bucket. And that's because we offset, right, the bucket interval and where it occurs. So that's just kind of like, it could, one way that you might use this is, let's say that for whatever reason, you want the last bit of the hour to be included with like the next hours, like bucketing for maybe rounding purposes, or, who knows, you can now include that last row for like the 45 minutes to the next hour, right? That's now going to be included with these, like this time bucket period instead of with the last time bucket period. So that can be kind of useful. And what's cool is that you can also, let me make this a little bit wider so you can see this. So say that you do want to have kind of this rounding, like you round up the last 15 minutes of an hour to being bucketed with the next time bucket period. But you want it to, instead of reading, 45 minutes, you can just shift your time bucket output to read 15 minutes later. So if I run this query, so what I do is that, right, this is my offset, and then kind of just to counteract how the offset is kind of displaying itself in the final bucket view, kind of to offset that, I can just add back the 15 minutes. And so if I run this, right, now we have this from the 45 time period all the way to 1 a.m., right? This 12:45 a.m. is still going to be sent to the 1 a.m. bucket, right? And that's coming from this offset. But I can kind of like rename my bucket so that it looks a little bit cleaner. And so it shows like the top of the 1 a.m. hour. So that this adding that 15 minutes, you can do that without the offset. So like, for example, going back to this query. So say that, right, I'm summing per hour. This one doesn't have an offset, right? So let's say instead of having the bucket reading at the beginning of the bound of your bucketed time, your bucketed hour, let's say you wanted it to read back the middle of your bucketed time. So what you could do is just add 30 minutes as bucket. And now you can actually, right, it's not changing how the data is being bucketed, but it's changing the display of your bucketed time period. So kind of like maybe you wanted instead to have it being read the middle of the hour instead of the beginning. So that's kind of just how you could utilize adding time afterwards to your time bucket function. And it really
the other thing, by the way, that can be useful for is if you want to get the end of the range as well. So like if you have, so often, I mean, there's also, we have in Toolkit a time bucket range function that will give you this sort of more for free. But and I think that may eventually be worked into the core database as well. But if you want to see like the two sides of your range, right, in two separate columns, you can do time bucket 1 hour, time, and then time bucket 1 hour, time plus 1 hour as a separate column as sort of the other end of your range. So that's going to be the start and end, like, again, not inclusive for that range, but that would be how you would sort of construct that range from it. And even you could even do that as a full range query if you wanted to make it into that. You could say TSTZ range and wrap those two things, right, with like that would be another way of just showing that thing. So now you can see the start and end of your range essentially, if that's useful.
Yeah. So that's kind of, right, that's how offset works, and then how you can also use offset to maybe round up certain rows, depending on your needs. I mean, likely you probably wouldn't round up 15 minutes, but you might want to round up like 1 minute before the hour, that counts towards the bucket in the next hour. You know, you can experiment with offset as you desire. I think that's just another one. So then the other optional function that you can use in time bucket is origin.
Sorry, just one other thing. One of the other ways that you can use offset, by the way, is to, like, I mean, maybe you'll talk about this later, but you can use it to shift time zone, much like you do with origin. So you could use it to sort of shift a time zone. You could say, if I want it at X time, then I can do it that way. So
yeah,
like I could do it by 4 hours, or I could do it by whatever.
That's a great point. I actually don't have I don't mention that later. So thank you for throwing that out there. Yeah, offset, many uses, and you may have not used it before, so you should try it. So then the last optional thing for time bucket, and this is actually origin is also usable in time bucket NG, and we'll get there in a second. But yeah, so it's this origin option. And so this is actually, it's a timestamp. It's a single date that you choose. The default origin is 2001-3. So if I didn't have this extra time, just this date alone is kind of the default origin that Timescale sets for you. But you can actually shift the origin, and essentially the origin is just a point in time that kind of all your
Sorry to interrupt, but
oh no, go for it.
Before anyone asks, no, I don't remember why in heck we chose that origin. It might be the Postgres origin for some of these things as well, So I think that might have been a Postgres, but I have origins and this sort of stuff are just like weird as all get out. So just, yeah.
And what's
anyway.
fun is that the decided origin for time bucket NG is actually the 1st of January because it's the beginning of a month as opposed to the 3rd of January. Fun fact.
Woo!
Yeah, woohoo. So back to origin. So the origin is kind of going to be like the anchor for which all your time calculations are coming off of. And so the calculations will be modulo, which, okay, that's a very mathy term, but hang with me for a second. So your time periods will be modulo of what the origin is. And so what that means is that, so we have 15 incremented, right? Our data is incremented at a 15 minute interval, and I'm getting hourly data. So the original origin, right? So here now I'm actually stating the origin that I wanted to start at. The origin that we by default have is this time, right? 0, 0, all this good stuff. So what if I shift it 1 hour? What if I have it 1 hour? So when I run this, you see that it's not actually changing my bucket. And that's because 1 hour, a 1 hour calculation off of, a 1 hour shifted origin, it's not going to change like the bucket itself. Like it can base the calculations since like it's 1 hour and shifted 1 hour, the calculations won't actually change because, the origin is, I guess it's probably easier to show. It's kind of an interesting concept. It's easier to show, like if I were to do 15 minutes instead of an hour shifting on the origin, that will be actually reflected in my bucket here. So it's kind of like only values that would not kind of work in tandem with your decided interval would show up as kind of like shifting the bucket value. It's kind of like, origin can be useful, and it's like can do similar things to offset, but generally you probably won't really need to use origin, but it's just like an interesting like additional argument that you could use to kind of like offset or shift the time bucket that you have, but in like a different way. I don't know if you have anything more to say about origin, David, but it's
yeah, actually, would you mind I think that often it's used to like shift day of week type stuff so that you get so that's one of the big things that you may want to do. So like if you want to like shift where like a 7-day period starts or ends, that's one of the things that you'll often use something like origin to do. So you'll start it on a Monday or whatever, right?
Yeah, and actually I think that's why it's the 3rd. I just remembered. I think it's because that's a Monday.
Yeah. So
versus,
yeah.
I think I need to. Otherwise, we get.
And this is why time sucks, and you should never, or at least maybe it's not time; it's our calendar. I don't know. Anyway, this has been your weekly installment of "This Is Why Time Is Horrible," or measuring time is the horrible.
Worst. Dun, 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 dun. That's funny.
So anyway, tell me something. If you change that to be like, if you were to shift that so that it was like today or like a day before, what would happen? I don't even know.
Oh yeah, so at least shifting.
Sorry, a day before the date that we're working with.
Oh, a day before the date that we're.
What do we get for our bucket? I don't even know.
Let's see. See, this is the fun stuff that you can just jump into once you get into origin. or day before.
That's fine.
Then it just starts the week, I guess, like that.
Whoa, that's weird.
So my guess is that it would start the week.
Oh yeah, can you? Okay, I see.
Like
I see.
until it's like modulo.
Yeah.
The 22nd of October.
Got it.
Which is kind of fun. I don't know.
Yeah. So another thing that you can do is sort of do a make your own interval bucket. I think using some of this stuff. So you can, if you have like a start date, right? If you have a start time, you can then make your own interval bucket by basically subtract it. So you do an offset, you do an origin of your start time. So let's say our start time was 10:20, and then we subtract that value from that. So
you mean outside?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Which value?
2016 10:20.
Oh, 2016 10:20. Okay, I'm just gonna.
And maybe let's bucket by day instead of week, or like even hour. Let's try hour.
1 hour.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And right, so then we get like an interval bucket starting at a time, right?
Oh, that's cool.
So, is there a way to do from an hour ago? I think you would just do the same sort of thing. You would just, except that yeah, so you can do that. You could do you could start your origin at now minus 1 hour and subtract now minus 1 hour, right? So if you do that, and then you have things that are from now, right? So, and of course, everything's going to be negative here because it's going to be like 5 years ago, right? 6, 5 years ago, 5.5 years. I don't know. Anyway, so
it just switched to the new year, so it's okay. Oh,
I think that'll work. Or is it an error?
No, what's the error? Let's see. I don't know why this syntax error now.
Oh, you don't need the timestamp.
Oh, got it. Okay. Let's see. No, okay. Invalid
input send. Oh, now minus 1 hour, : interval.
Oh, minus 1 hour.
Or interval 1 hour.
Coding live, folks.
Yeah.
Ooh, there we go.
Okay, so yeah, so you could do something like that. Right. So now, why don't you do that instead of doing it from energy usage? You could do generate series now, right? Like as
series. Let's see.
You could do now, comma. I mean, anyway, you can figure out how to do this, right? Like, but the John, I don't know if that answered your question, but I think that's giving you sort of how you would think about it, right? Like, obviously, you probably wouldn't be doing this with dates that are way in the past. Or, I mean, honestly, actually, maybe we do it this way. Why don't we just subtract? I don't know. Like, we could subtract. Okay, so it answered John's question, but you could get a more realistic answer by subtracting something like, in this case, 2,000 days, right? So if we say now minus 2,000 days, : interval, or interval 2,000 days.
Could I do 2,000 days and 1 hour?
2,000 days. I think so. I think intervals work like that. I don't know. You might want to make that as a no. You might need a comma. Yeah.
1 hour. For some reason, I thought you could do that. Maybe I'm being too ambitious here.
Oh, you can do it. You can do it the other way. Plus, yeah, exactly. You can add.
I need to put interval there too.
You might, but it might. I think it might infer that one, but anyway.
No. What is it? At or near position.
Oh, you're missing a parens?
Where am I missing?
You want to put a parens after that, maybe? No, that looks good.
Maybe do I need to put extra parens here?
Maybe. I don't think so. Anyway,
Nope,
it doesn't matter.
Okay.
We probably. Oh, there it is.
Oh,
yeah,
duh.
Let's go back
I forgot to take
thing.
this
Sorry.
out.
Yep, that's it. Look at that. Hey.
Wow. It's always the simple things. Yeah. It's always the simple things that get you. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so now you're seeing that this is a more reasonable thing, right? So that's a pretty fun thing that you can do, where you can start then bucketing from a particular point. So you're like, okay, I want to analyze this. And I've seen people do this sort of thing where they're like trying to analyze trends between multiple things, where they're saying like, okay, the start time for this particular thing is here, and the trend is going, and now I have this other series where the start time is different, right? So if I bucket them both, well, that doesn't work, but maybe I could interval bucket them essentially by using a different offset for each one. And then I could compare more easily based on that.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a way of using origin that I had no idea about. So sweet. That's awesome. I'm going to skip this stuff because we kind of talked about origin. So let's just, let's briefly chat about.
And to be fair, that may or may not actually need origin. I don't know if it actually does. It may help you there, but I'm not sure that it's necessary. I'd have to think a little bit more about it to see.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I wanted to talk about TimescaleDB. And so essentially TimescaleDB has many of the same arguments as regular TimeBucket. I forgot to put in a TimescaleDB on the slide. Imagine that says TimescaleDB. So the arguments are going to be bucket width, the time column, the origin, which, very similar to TimeBucket's origin, except the origin for TimeBucket can happen before, after, during, whenever, compared to your column, like your time column. But for TimescaleDB, it has to occur before. That is one of a good caveat to note for origin for TimescaleDB. And then the last fun thing that's like very exciting about TimescaleDB is that it gives you kind of the power to use more time zone functionality. So I'll hop.
So just a little bit of background here, and there's the possibility. It seems like we're not going to get to our gap fill thing, so I was completely wrong about this being a shorter subject. Sorry about that.
I told you, David. I told you. No, I'm just kidding.
So, yeah, the thing that I would say there is that TimescaleDB is being developed now, and the original TimeBucket was basically just like essentially doing I guess it would be almost a mod on the underlying data, right? So not a mod, but you're basically just seeing where it falls, right? So it's very clear, and it's divided very evenly based on UTC time, based on the internal representation, which is an integer, right? Whereas TimescaleDB knows more about what this means as a actual as time, and time, as we've noted, is very confusing. Months are different lengths. There are time zones. There are time zone offsets. There's daylight savings time. There's all sorts of crazy shit. The original one was really meant for those shorter periods where it's 15-minute buckets, where you just want to you basically just divide the period into that. And that's really simple to do. But and you're basically just dividing, and then every time you increment, it's like, okay, here's the next bucket. You're basically doing integer division with a floor. Whereas with TimescaleDB, it has the ability to do things that are a little bit weirder and different, that aren't fixed widths. Right? So months aren't fixed widths. When you start getting into time zone, days aren't fixed widths necessarily, right? As you start thinking about daylight savings time. So that's the sort of stuff that TimescaleDB will take more into account.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yeah, no, thanks for that background. Because yeah, so as David said, TimescaleDB, it is still currently experimental. So if you do want to use TimescaleDB, just make sure that you include the TimescaleDB experimental kind of tag before. That's not the right word. I'm just going to use tag for now because my brain can't think of the other word. And then you can call the TimescaleDB function, and you'll be able to actually use the function. And what's nice, like what David said before, that kind of the added functionality is that instead of being able to only bucket with, time bucket, not TimescaleDB, you had to have fixed widths. And so what's nice is that now you can actually use months and years in for like a bucketing interval with TimescaleDB. So that's very cool. Gap fill functions or charts will look. That's neat to see. Yeah, you'll have to add more about that, David, because the question was need to see gap fill, like the Python gap fill functions. So maybe is that, I'm guessing, is that input on like our time gap fill function? Am I reading that?
Yeah, I don't quite know, David. Maybe you can clarify. I think we're running to the end of our time anyway. So maybe if you want to ask that question, we'll cover it either in a week or two. I think Miranda's sort of scheduled to do another one in 2 weeks. But if you have a question about gap fill, please do ask it here, and we'll make sure to include it when we get back to this sort of this topic. But time bucket gap fill is another function that can help with that sort of thing. And yeah, so that's something that we can absolutely talk about.
Yeah, that's one that I really love. But yeah, it seems like we might not get to the gap fill today. So definitely, put your any questions that you have. So with TimescaleDB or next gen, if I run this right now, I can actually bucket by month, which previously, I have posted in previous webinars. Cool. We will look in the comments to find those then. So right now we have that our data is bucketing by, starting at the 1st of October in this case, as kind of being the beginning of the bounds for these monthly buckets. Makes sense. Cool. Now, where TimescaleDB gets kind of much more interesting and helpful is the time zone functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. So keep in mind that my time column is a timestamp TZ data type. So it is taking into account the time zone, which for me is EST or UTC -4. And you can see that reflected in the original time column here. Okay. And it's also, I'm noting that my current set time zone is to EST as well. And so that's another thing that I want to note. And I say that because, so in this query, I have TimescaleDB. I want to bucket by days. So I'm doing 1 day intervals acting on my time column, but I want the days to be bucketed based on Denver time, the Denver time zone, which is 2 hours behind where EST is. So when it is 2 a.m. here in EST, or like where I am, when it's 2 a.m. here, it's going to just be switching over to 12 a.m. in Denver. Okay. So I say that because if I were to just I'm just going to take out this argument. So if I were to bucket by day, just using my time zone, EST, we see that, at 12 a.m. on the 22nd, right, that's going to be bucketed into the same day, right? We see that, this all matches up until I hit here. Here. And right, because as soon as it ticks over from 23:45, that's going to be the last reading that's in the 22nd day. As soon as it hits 24:00:00, which is 12 a.m., right, then it starts the next day's bucket. Well, since in this one, the Denver time zone is 2 hours behind, these first 8 rows are actually going to be bucketed to the 21st, because in Denver, when it is, from 12 a.m. my time, Eastern Standard Time, all the way up to 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, that is actually in Denver a different day. It's the previous day. So that, since I'm using the time zone argument, I want my bucketed day times to reflect the American Denver or the America Denver time zone. That's why we're seeing kind of this difference in how these rows are being bucketed. So, right, my original time, it's kind of like the time zone is taking the original time, or the time that the data is being recorded, but it's going to bucket it based on the time that you specify, the time zone that you specify. And just to note that, or to show you, like if I were to transform my time column from EST time to America Denver time using this query, we actually see, right, that these first 8 rows reflect that, for those time periods in EST, the corresponding America Denver time is actually for the 21st, not the 22nd of October. So this is when I transform my original time column. We see that, right, the day bucket here makes sense, kind of why we're seeing these first 8 rows being bucketed into the 21st as opposed to the 22nd. Okay, so, and also I want to note this 2-hour shift. This is another tricky thing, and time zones. So when it comes to time zones, why we're seeing the bucket displayed as 02 or 2 a.m. As the start of the day buckets, that is because my console is set to the EST time zone. And if I were to change my console, or like, if I were to change the time zone for like this client to be the America Denver time, the bucket would show 21:12 a.m. But because I'm using EST as the time zone, it's showing me 12 a.m. Denver time, but in my Eastern time zone time, which is 2 hours after. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Essentially, right, it's showing me the start of Denver's 12 a.m. bucket, but in EST time. So it's showing that, right, 2 a.m. EST time is the beginning of Denver's bucketed daytime at 12 a.m. So that's kind of like another fun caveats. Time zones, man, they're great.
Or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely that tricked me up because I feel like it can just, I don't know, time zones can just get very messy very fast. But yeah, so those are essentially time bucket and time bucket ng functions. And I guess we did not have time to get to 𝗥𝗲𝗃, which is really sad.
Next time.
But good to note. Next time we'll get there. Yeah, and we'll do a nice in-depth look at time bucket 𝗥𝗲𝗃, which is very cool. All right. Well, does anyone have any additional questions? It's awesome, David. Thank you for these great questions and comments. We will definitely make sure to dive into your questions about 𝗥𝗲𝗃 in our next session, which is exciting. Yeah, if any of you have additional questions or topics that you want us to dive into, I guess I can move this off the screen. Please let us know, because that's really helpful to us to know what we should cover, what's helpful, what's interesting. I mean, maybe none of this is interesting. I feel great about 𝗥𝗲𝗃 now because we have, great feedback about that. So we're gonna make that happen. But if there are other things that you want info on or that you would like us to discuss, let us know, because it's just fun to have you all be a part of the decisions here. Yeah, thanks for coming. This is it's nice to get back into streaming, or just like really, I don't know, I see it more as just hanging out with you all and hanging out with David and talking about random crap. Hopefully that's, how y'all feel about it too. Yeah, cool.
Awesome. It's great. Thanks, Miranda.
Yeah, thanks for your input, David, for jumping in, giving cool background, and also ways to kind of manipulate these extra optional arguments like origin. Learning something new every day. Sweet. Yeah.
My pleasure.
All right, folks.
Thanks, folks. See you later.
See you later. Have a good rest of your day.